I'm super glad you've come on, Chris. And one thing I've just noticed as well is that I've had beard jealousy before, but I've never had mustache jealousy. Like this is a brand new one. Like, and the mustache that I can grow is I just end up looking like Cat Weasel, and it's no good. But that one is absolutely phenomenal. But we've just been chatting, and we've just spoken about your recent injury. So I usually start with saying, "How have you been?" I imagine the last however long the injury's been going on has been challenging, but yeah, how have you been?
Yeah, I've been surviving is kind of how I've been saying it, and it's really, I've been great. I've been blessed. I've been everything has been wonderful, but I'm trying to keep my vibrations high, trying to keep the energy up, trying to attract healing, and
Mhm.
keep my mindset in the getting better every single day sort of idea. But I'll tell you, man, it's been tough. I had hip surgery on a torn labrum and a bone shave at the beginning of August. And it was timing wise kind of perfect because competitions have been canceled for me. My world championship that was supposed to happen internationally in the fall was canceled. So my schedule got cleared. That is the best time to take care of an injury that's been causing me pain for several years. But I did not realize how lonely and isolating it would feel to be injured. And even coming out of COVID, where we had lockdowns where I'm currently in Chicago, Illinois, in the United States, and we had lockdowns for several months where I wasn't with my community, I wasn't training with people. But to be forced into that position of sitting on the couch, one thing I realized that I don't do very well as an athlete is sit still.
Yeah, is there when did this sort of injury start to crop up? Is there a moment when it came up? Because I understand you pulled out of the Olympic trials through injury. Was it this
It
that
was not
caused that?
this actually.
Right.
Yeah,
Okay.
injury, right? So the bodies are amazing, and bodies are just so incredible in how they compensate and how they get you through, right? So
Mm.
in the lead up for the Olympic trials in January 2020, I was doing race walking. So I went to the 50K Olympic trials in race walking, and that was a new sport for me. I had picked that sport up in early 2019, just with a sort of idea of trying something new, of being a beginner and a novice at something. And I was sort of at a down point in my duathlon training. So duathlon is run, bike, run. And so I qualified for the Olympic trials in that lead up of doing 50K and really jumping my mileage and uh, quite honestly, probably having ineffective technique, which is super important in race walking. I tore my meniscus. And so I pulled out of the Olympic trials with a torn meniscus on the same side as this torn hip labrum. So, best I could say is it's probably possibly related, but I've also been an athlete for, 3 decades. And so that's also, you know, just overuse. It's a very common injury for athletes. It just doesn't cause everyone pain. And mine was causing
Mm.
me pain for about at least 18 months. And so there wasn't a moment where I was like, snap, you're hurt. It's just like one of those things as an athlete, like, am I pushing too hard? Well, I had a big training block. Maybe I'm just tired. I stood up a lot yesterday and I walked a lot at on vacation or whatever. My lower back hurts, my hamstrings a little tight, all of those things. And it just took a long time to put those pieces together to say, okay, I think this is what the actual cause is.
Have you experienced sort of a feeling of wanting to push through it? Did you feel like I need to keep this athlete mindset, and did you feel connected to your body in a way where you were okay? There is something wrong here, or yeah, like you were just kind of talking about, is that we as athletes very often associate pain with this bang, I'm on it. I'm heading down the right road. I'm going to create that adaptation that I'm seeking, and this is something that is a part of the process. Did you find yourself falling into that mindset, or was there maybe an idea like, I could be doing myself damage here?
Oh, there was definitely an idea of this is not a good pain. I think
Yeah.
I'm familiar with that idea of being comfortable, being uncomfortable. And so, especially in running, there's a lot of pushing to really dark places, really painful places, but pain in a way of like I'm working hard and I'm going up against the limits of where I'm currently at to get to a better place. And this was just like fire. This is just
Yeah.
blazing pain. So it was pretty clear. But the problem with it is, and I think this is something that a lot of athletes encounter, is that so when it flares up, it's, oh, this is clearly something wrong. Okay, maybe if I just take a day off, or I'll go easy today, or for me, I have multiple options of training, so I can swim, I can bike, I can run. Oh, I'll just swim today and see if that loosens it up. And oh, I feel better today, So because it wasn't a persistent, full-time 10 out of 10. And I think that's another thing, right? Is like, as an athlete, I think my pain meter is broken. I have a 2 and I have a 12. And there's really, and it's kind of a full-time, like I have a lot of aches and pains that are full-time. So it became kind of confusing with this one. And it really took getting to a point where I think as an athlete, it kind of pushed beyond where a non-athlete would have called it, would have pulled the plug.
Yeah, it's a topic that I've spoken about in a previous episode, about this pushing through pain and knowing where that limit is. And you're so right with triathlon and duathlon and even race walking. Like there's just it's a non-negotiable. Like it's just such a non-negotiable in that sport. Many sports, that pain barrier, and it's knowing where that good stress and bad stress just flips. And then you're like, okay, I've pushed it. I used to describe that I was pushing, I would find my boundary to push it, potentially break, like, and try not to do it and have a catastrophic break where it requires surgery and a long layoff, but enough where I could then push it and then know where that boundary was so that I could get as close to it and then pull back. I remember so many times where I was literally about to tear a hamstring and I stopped, and it looked crazy. It looked mad. Like at the time, like my teammates are going, "What are you doing? Like, why are you stopping?" I am literally 3 steps away from tearing this hamstring. Like I can tell. Sure enough, you go to the physio, like, geez, you caught this early. Like, and it stopped it from being 6 weeks off, and it was like 3 days. So it's a very fine line, and tuning into your body and the awareness of your body is a really big part of being an athlete and knowing when that barrier and that boundary is crossed.
Yeah, I think that's right on. And I think there were a lot of injuries that I caught 3 days before, my hamstring exploded, but for unfortunate reasons, this didn't work out that way. But I feel like I have a really acute sense of my body, and not just as an athlete, but because so much of my last, 2 decades of life have been really body focused in how I exist in my body, how I show up in my body. And I do a lot of paying attention to my body.
Yeah.
And I think all athletes do. Our bodies are our machines. And so we need to be very in tune with them. Fortunately for me, I always laugh because when you show up at some of these triathlons, right, and like Ironman races, there's a very specific stereotype, a caricature of the person who's doing these races. And I've never been a person to shy away from taking a day off if I need it. And so I think that's been a real benefit for the longevity of my career, is that if I'm going on vacation, I'm going to take a couple of days off, and I feel okay with that, and even in the build up to world championships or things like that I need that balance of mental well-being and physical well-being. And I have a pretty clear boundary of where that's at. And I am very forgiving of myself if life happens and I miss a session, because I don't think that one session is not going to make or break my race or my outcomes. So I think that part of that is being really process focused too, of I love the training as much as I love the races. I actually probably love the training more than I love the races. And the races are the cherry on top of all of the work and the process of getting, acquainted with my body in a new way, of pushing it to new areas and new boundaries, and working through whatever mental components go along with that.
Yeah, and especially with, I think you've got to enjoy the training for you. Like there's so much of it I can't imagine what the race to training ratio is for the events that you do, but it's going to be in the high percentages. Was there something that you felt this injury you've learned, like it's taught you? Is there a new lesson that you felt you've learned with this one?
It's that it's really lonely to be injured and really isolating. And that was, I think I really had to sit with that, because in having my torn meniscus, that was kind of dealing with that at the very start of the COVID-19 pandemic, where everyone was put away. And so because I couldn't access my physio, I couldn't access the medical facilities because things were shut down, I did all of that rehab myself. So I had a really strong focus. I had a plan. I had, an agenda, and I had a purpose. And I felt good doing that by myself, and I didn't need other people around for that. And, honestly, I think I just felt like the sadness of that first injury in January 2020, and had to process that sadness of having this incredible experience to go to the Olympic trials, and then having the extreme disappointment of having an injury that would put me out of competition for many months. This time around, because all of social life is sort of coming back, and I think I've been craving that connection, craving those interactions that I just haven't had. And I wouldn't say I'm a very social person. I'm probably a pretty big introvert, and I'm pretty comfortable being alone. But to have to be in a situation where I literally couldn't get out of bed without my wife picking up my leg. I couldn't get into the car without her helping to pull my leg up and put my foot in the vehicle. And that sort of dependency was a challenge for me. And then just this idea of I had just reconnected with my teammates and with my people that I coach, and the folks at the community. We have a place called Edge Athlete Lounge here. That's an incredible community resource for athletes. And that as soon as I had surgery, I felt like I was off the map. I felt like, like out of sight, out of mind, totally disconnected. Everybody's lives go on. And, I was just sitting there like, wow, how long is this process of coming back? So this has been a very different injury for me. And I think I'm just at the point where I'm starting to, I turned the corner into feeling good, which I know is the most dangerous piece, because you're not quite healed yet, but you feel good and want to push. I caught myself. I ran across the parking lot to get to the car the other day, and I was like, "No, you're not supposed to run yet. Don't do that." But I'm feeling that I'm starting to see progress, and that's really exciting. And now I just know I have to be patient, and I think that's the hardest part.
I've felt that loneliness before, and it's a really challenging part. Like, I just so vividly remember things like turning up for a training session and the whole team's there, and everyone's like, right, let's go, plan sorted, let's go out and train. And you're like, I want to jump out the door, and you just can't. Like, physio grabs you, sit down, don't do anything. And it's my advice, and I don't know if you did something similar, is to, if you do get injured and you feel that loneliness, is to really lean upon the other things in your life, like, and try to, I guess, distract yourself, because you will find yourself just constantly ruminating it over in your mind, over, and it will tear you apart. But also you'll try to rush the process, I think. Whereas if you can distract yourself with something else, then the healing process just will happen. You'll be in a better space physically, mentally, and that stress level hopefully will come down. And if it's an inflammation thing, hopefully those markers come down as well. So yeah, I don't know if you had any way in which you combated that loneliness, and anything else you focused on outside of your training.
Yeah, no, that's great advice. I think it's right on. I can't think of one thing that I actually did focus my efforts on. I balance being an athlete with being an activist, and so a lot of my work has been combating the horrible legislation that's happening in the United States around transgender youth participating in sports. And I have made it my life's work to be a person who is a resource for people, who is a resource for organizations and teams and leagues through my website, transathlete.com, and putting myself out there to be a voice for people who don't feel that they can speak up because it's unsafe, or because they are the targets of discrimination themselves. So I felt like a lot of my downtime, because I was on my computer more, became more stressful actually, in terms of, I certainly had enough to keep me busy, but it wasn't the relaxing, rejuvenating, refreshing, you know, distraction that I probably had hoped for. It's still very much related to my day to day. So it wasn't much of a relief.
Well, it's got you've got purpose in what you're doing in your time off, which is more than a lot of people can say for whenever they're having their downtime. And if anything, it can take a lifetime for people to search for that type of purpose. But the topic in which you are working in, it's got so much controversy around it. So much people are talking about it. There's so many voices that are yelling on social media, and I mean, just from I have an awareness of this subject that I don't know everything, and I am sure enough going to learn a lot, as well as try to unpack your experiences. And I think just even through delving into your story there and going on transathlete.com, like, I've learned a ton already. And I can't speak for the UK legislation. I know the American legislation is ultimately, not just in this subject, but in many subjects and policies, is from an outsider looking in, it's broken. But there's no perfect system. And I just think, yeah, the thing that I've come out of this whole process of before this conversation was that I need to be open that I don't know everything. And I think that's for me, I feel good in that being a place to start. Like, I'm comfortable not knowing what I don't know, because then it means I can learn. That's why I'm excited about this conversation for sure, and the topics we're going to get into.
Yeah, that's, I think the best approach, and certainly another athlete mindset moment, right? Of saying, like, I don't know what I don't know. And I'm always willing to learn something. And once you learn it, you can't unlearn it, right? So it's your responsibility then, once you have this information, to do something with it and to be better. I've always been drawn to athletes, and my role models when I was growing up were athletes who were social justice advocates, which I didn't realize as a 8-year-old person assumed to be a little white girl, like that someone like Jesse Owens or Jackie Robinson or Muhammad Ali or John Carlos and Tommy Smith would be the people that I'd be looking to as examples of what I aspired to be. And I think that when we are athletes, we have an incredible platform, and that's been the gift of my life, to use this platform to help educate and provide visibility for not only people who are like me, but people who don't believe they know someone like me.
Yeah, this just comes to mind is, I don't know if you've seen it or read it, a book by Michael Bennett, NFL, forget his position, for Seattle Seahawks. He wrote a book called Things That Make White People Uncomfortable. And him and his brother, it's a phenomenal book. And reading it, obviously talks a lot about Colin Kaepernick, and really just talking through why those movements are happening. And that's a really important, and I too have resonated with those athletes that you mentioned, people like Muhammad Ali, people that stood up for something and had a purpose behind them. I think that's a huge thing for any athlete to have, because if you are going to have a platform, like, utilize it. People just look to you for everything, and it should not be shined away from. And that book, it really shone through why they're doing it, why everyone was taking the knee, and the reasons and the stories behind it. That's the nuts and bolts of everything. But I want to get into just where it started for you. So what was it like in your early years, growing up with your parents, with siblings? Start wherever you want to start there.
Yeah, sport was really something that came to me really early, because no matter how disconnected I felt from the kids in my neighborhood outside of the quarter of the field, as soon as we were playing a game, all of those fears and self-consciousness and sort of any bullying or teasing sort of stopped, because I was a good athlete. And there was something there. It was a space where I found validation at a very young age, and decided to pour myself into it because it's felt like a safe space, which is really interesting for me to say right now, because sport is such an unsafe space for people like me. But as a young So I was assigned female at birth, raised and socialized as female, grew up playing girls and women's sports. And yeah, as a young person assumed to be a tomboy, I sort of got a pass in terms of my gender expression. But uh, on the court or the field, it was accepted, it was welcomed, it was embraced, um, it was celebrated actually, because I was a good athlete. And those sort of, being a tomboy and being a good athlete sort of were synonymous, I guess, at
Yeah.
the time that I was growing up for whatever reason. And I would say I had a very happy childhood in terms of playing and feeling just uniquely like myself. I had a very sure awareness as a young person that I wasn't like my brother, who's a little bit younger than me, but I also wasn't like the girls in my class. And so I just always felt like me. I was just Chris, and people kind of just treated me like I was a separate entity. And
Yeah.
like, we didn't have the words transgender. I never knew a trans person, didn't have an understanding of what that even meant. And, I just existed as myself. And I think around junior high, puberty time was sort of when, things sort of became more troublesome for me in people questioning who I was, which then made me question myself. And there was a lot of harassment and teasing that sort of went along with that. But when I think back about it, I don't ever really think about it in the bullying context or having like a really hard time. There were tons of bullying situations and people making comments. And specifically in playing sports, even in high school, became less of a safe space. I had a great jump shot playing basketball, and the harassment that people would, or sort of trash talk that people would do is, are you a guy or a girl? Right. And so
Mm.
like even on the court, I was being questioned about my gender. And I think more of that was about my style of play and my athleticism than it was about my expression of gender. Because on the court, I had a ponytail like all the other girls. I had the same uniform, like in a lineup in a photo, we'd be largely the same. And I think it was through my expression of movement and my expression of athleticism that people then began to use that as a way to sort of criticize me or try to tear me down. Probably not knowing that every time they said that internally, I was like, yes.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
just couldn't share that with people. I didn't know the language of the terminology to sort of share that with other people, but that was exciting to me.
Is I was going to say before you said you got into sort of like your teenage years and it became more troublesome in that pre-teen age. Were you happy? Like, because you kind of were doing you mentioned there you were doing your own thing, you were just being yourself. And I think any child you look at a really young age, sort of around that, I guess 10, they're just being themselves. And obviously we lose that in our lives. And do you think it was other people's expectations of you that started to create that troublesome and that friction with your identity?
Yeah, and that started at age 4. My earliest memory of sort of being called out about my gender was running around the neighborhood with the little kids on a hot summer day. And we all had our shirts off. And my aunt pulled me around the back of the house and said, "You can't run around with your shirt off. Little girls don't do that." And that's the earliest memory I have of saying, okay, well, I don't see any difference between all these 4-year-old bodies. Like, we all look the same, and it's hot. And I don't understand. You're saying I'm a little girl, so I can't do that. I had fallen in love with skateboarding probably around the time of being 7 or 8 years old. And I was, into skateboarding magazines and watching videos. And, this is like pre YouTube. So actually like VHS videos, like,
Yeah.
really like, so I started to fall in love with skateboarding. And then I was told, little girls don't skateboard. You can't do that. You can't wear your hat backwards. Little girls don't do that. And I was like, just, I had this disconnect of saying, okay, well, you're saying I'm a little girl and I don't do that, but I love wearing my hat backwards and I love skateboarding. So like, it doesn't make sense to me. And,
Mm.
there were more and more of those situations from adults in my well-intended adults in my life, and then kids in school, of course. So because I was interested in different things than the other girls in my class, or, I think that was where it sort of people could see the differences, and that started to shine those differences back on me, of making me question like, okay, you're saying I'm one thing. I feel really drawn to doing this or expressing myself in this way or wearing these clothes. So something is off here. And, I think that sort of started this internal questioning in high school, but I just didn't have the exposure either. I graduated with a class of 24 students in northern Wisconsin.
Wow.
After moving from Chicago, where I had 1,000 in my 8th grade class, and so I went into this really small world where there were no gay people at my school that were out, at least. And, there were definitely no trans people, and all the exposure that I had was from media. So it was Jerry Springer and Maury Povich and these trashy daytime talk shows that were actually showing caricatures or, really negative portrayals of transgender women. And I never saw someone like myself. And so I just didn't have the understanding or the words to put to it. And then I went to college and still didn't have exposure. And, I think it took me a really long time to figure out how to talk about myself to other people. But internally, I felt peace with how I was expressing myself. The troubles just came when people, punched me about it. Like, that was really like, when my very presence was a threat to other people, that's when it became a problem for me.
Yeah, that it's just sounds like such a confusing time, and mainly because you don't have that. I mean, you've got role models as an athlete, but you haven't got role models to explain what you were going through and any yardstick on how to deal with it, let alone a roadmap of where to go, what to do. What was your, or who was the first outlet that you went to talk about what you were going through?
Oh, I don't even really remember the first spot. I guess eventually became YouTube, but I probably reading books before that, and just trying to find a sense of some resonance in something that I saw. I stopped playing sports in college, organized sports, because I didn't want to be on a women's team. And I didn't know that at the time, but I gave up my childhood dream of being a college basketball player because I just couldn't, like, internally knew that I couldn't stand if a coach came in and said, "Okay, ladies, let's go," or "All right, girls, let's play." So I moved into individual sports or intramural sports where I didn't have to use a locker room or a restroom to be with the team. I tried to find these spots to fill these holes athletically, but I think that I did that and threw myself into organizations, clubs, experiences in the college setting so that I didn't have to think about my identity. So really, I think it all sort of fell apart for me after I graduated college, because I lost my identity as a college student, as the editor of the newspaper, as the radio station DJ, of all these things that I had filled my time with. And, then I was just faced with all of this time to really think about who I am, how am I showing up in the world, and am I happy in doing that? So it's really those sort of post-college years where I started to search and look for information. In all honesty, I think, the biggest source of my information was my partner, who I'm now married to. And we've been together this year, will be 20 years of being together. So we were together pre-transition and, through my transition. And she just had a lot more exposure to queer culture, to trans identity, to the LGBTQ plus community than I did, and really gave me resources and the space to just figure it out. Like, she just would have been happy with me being happy with myself, regardless of how my identity, ended up in the end. And so really, she was able to guide me to places to look.
Well, I guess in some way, shape or form, every young person, even maybe at that age, is going through, and more, and do you know what, more so now, just with the sheer amount of you suffered from a lack of visibility for people like yourself. Now there's so much visibility of people out there, and almost with that, we've gone the other way. Like, there's almost too many options. There's too many options of people who I want to be like. So even if you are just a heterosexual woman and you are now looking at thousands of women, all different shapes, sizes, colors, and like then you're talking like dress styles and who you want to be, and it's like, where the hell do I fit in this, and how do I be authentic in what I do? And so I don't know if you have, would there be any advice that you have for younger people that are perhaps really wrestling with their own identity and discovering who they are, and maybe even feeling like, because it felt like you didn't, in a great way, you didn't want to be anyone else. You didn't want to be, you would deep down trying to be yourself. And I think some people fall into the trap of trying to be like other people. Would there be a piece of advice that you would give people that are falling into that bucket?
Yeah, I think, well, when I first started a social transition and started to tell people, I'm trans man, I want you to use he, him pronouns with me. My name has always been Chris, so that wasn't a change. But, I was trying to get people to change how they were looking at me and reflecting back their talk to me. And, as I started to be seen as a man and show up in the world as a man, I found that, I very much experienced what you just said of, trying on these different versions of myself. So in the first like year, I felt very unsteady about myself, probably the most unsteady I had ever felt about myself, because I did get caught up in trying to make sure that people saw me as a man. And I think, there were these moments where I, put on a mask of masculinity that certainly was not authentic to who I am deep down inside. And, from things like avoiding wearing lavender or pink, like I'll never be seen in those colors, to say like, I don't want someone to accidentally say she to me, to then, how I was showing up and how I was posturing, and even, how I was expressing myself in how the words I chose, how I was speaking. I really was trying very hard to be seen as a man, because I had this sort of image created by the media, magazines, movie stars, musicians, people in my life, of what a man should be. And so I went through several of these versions, and then got to this place where I'm like, wait a second, like this is not what it's about. I am transitioning and asking people to see me as I see myself, because I just want to be comfortable being myself. I don't have to pretend to be any type of man, or to perform masculinity in any certain way. I'm a dude who shaves his legs. Like I'm fine with that. Like that's fine. So we can all just express ourselves however feels comfortable to us. And I think the advice I'd give to somebody, or what I wish I would have known, is that it's okay for you to be you in any sort of way. Like you don't have to stack up or compare yourself to anybody, because at the end of the day, you have to go to bed and wake up happy. It's your life. Nobody cares as much about you as you care about yourself. And we are all the stars in our own movie. We are all just living our own lives. And even our very close friends, our family, the people who love us and love us for who we are, they're going to continue to love us if we, whether you're wearing a skirt or you're wearing pants. They're going to continue to love you if you have a shaved head or you have purple hair. Like it's about who you are on the inside and feeling good about how you are showing up. So what I wish that I would have known, and what I tell people, is not to care about other people's opinions, because ultimately other people's opinions of me don't matter. Like they're none of my business. Other people's opinions of me are none of my business, and everyone's going to have one. But at the end of the day, it doesn't affect who I am on the inside and how I feel about myself.
Not only that, it's something you cannot control. Like you can't control what anyone else expects of you or thinks of you, and trying to control those things will just cause a level of anxiety that is just not good for you. You're never going to be able to control that. So I'm so glad that was a beautifully articulated answer. What was the relationship with your mum like through this very young transitional age, before transition, but as you're sort of discovering who you are?
Yeah, just before that, I think this is certainly something that I learned as an athlete, is that I can never control other people's, thoughts about me. And I think that was like, being an athlete really helped me to transition publicly. And then, transitioning helped me as an athlete, because it alleviated all of those concerns I had and helped me focus on my sport. So, I think the resilience and the mindset and the lessons that I learned through sports really have helped me show up more authentically in the world, for that reason of saying, you have a bad performance on the court, people are going to talk. And I was very
Yeah.
accustomed to other people who don't play sports at all, whose opinions don't matter, having an opinion. And so,
Yeah.
it certainly helped me in the long run. My mom is awesome. She was a single mom, so certainly a hero and a role model for me. And she gave me a lot of space to be myself, and I think she just didn't quite understand it. And there were these moments where we would be in a store and I'd have my hat on backwards and someone say, "Oh, your son is blah blah blah," and she's like, "That's
Mm.
my daughter." Like I could tell she had a daughter and a son, and like I think this is something that I imagine for. I'm not a parent. I'm childless by choice, but if I imagine that parents have the vision for their kid, and those visions are different depending on the gender of the child. We do this before a baby even comes out. That it's from the gender reveal parties, which are so odd to me now, to what people buy for baby showers and how you decorate a room. And there's all of these social constructs and expectations that we put on children before they even show up in the world. And that certainly influences how a parent thinks about the future of their child. So I just don't think that my mom saw this in the cards for me.
Yeah.
But when I did tell her, I think she said, I thought she would have been more surprised if I said that I was going to wear a dress the next day than to tell her that I was trans. It just, everything
Right.
made sense. All of the pieces of my childhood and how I showed up in the world made sense. And I think she just found a lot of peace in me being happy and me being and confident and comfortable to show up and share my truth and my experience with other people. And I think our relationship has had its ups and downs. I think transition is a transition for everybody around me. You have to. People at my workplace had to change how they referred to me, and the
Mm.
people in my family who had known me for my entire life had to change how they saw me, and it's how they saw their relationships to me, and how they envisioned me as a child, and how they talked about me from that time, and how they talk about me now. And so I think I try to be very forgiving with those experiences. And I know that my mom is just super thrilled and proud of me in the way that I show up now. Like even in the times where she struggled a little bit in how to talk about me with her friends, which I think is in a small town where there are no other trans people. Like that's a real challenge that
Mm.
um, you know I'm sure has to be a struggle at times. But I don't think she really cares. I think she's just proud of me and happy that I'm so happy and that I'm doing well.
I've never really thought of that. How you said that everyone is transitioning. That's a really interesting way to talk about it, because the whole, the whole experience will be uncomfortable for a lot of people from the outside, I guess, because they're having to change everything that they think is in their mind, built from their own expectations put upon them, and they're having to reconfigure everything. And I think that's probably where a lot of the friction, I imagine, you encounter in people who even don't even know you, that will probably uphold.
It's back to that what you said at the beginning. You don't know what you don't know, and that piece of the unknown and the uncertainty is really scary for people. And like you said, it requires a lot of unpacking, a lot of those moments of saying, Jerry Springer, Maury Povich, Ace Ventura, Pet Detective. These are the
Yeah.
moments that I learned about trans people that were all really negative. And so, what does that mean for someone who I love and someone that I've known for so long to say that they're trans? When I first came out, there was a statistic in the United States. If you compared two studies, more people in America believe they had seen a ghost than know a trans person in real life. And
Wow.
so, when more people in the United States believe they've had a paranormal experience than have known someone like me in person, it becomes really easy to create this myth or a
Yeah.
stereotype around who trans people are and how why we're here and what we do. Where really it's my life is very um, uh, not remarkable in a lot of ways, right? Like I wake up, I have my coffee, I
Yeah.
check my Instagram, like my like trans lifestyle, and I'm using air quotes here, is very similar to other people, right? So it's the myths and misconceptions come from not knowing. They come from our influences, from what we've learned. They come from our school experiences where people were teased if they were not showing up in, if they presented in a gender expansive or sort of non-conforming way as their peers. And so all of my struggles, I think, in terms of dealing with other people have come from that lack of education.
Yeah, it's that again is, I think, the key to everything. And I'm sure when we get onto your activism work, that's the main crux behind it. Talk us through the actual transition itself. And from my understanding and what I've learned is there's multiple transitions and different ways to transition. What was the defining moment for you where you thought, this is what I want to do and this is where I'm going to go? And then I guess talk about how you transition. For you, I understand it's a lot of testosterone that you're taking on.
Yeah, not a lot. But it sounds like a lot. It sounds like I'm just
it's not like gallons.
Lewis, is this a video podcast? Do you show this video? Yeah. Like, let me just show, like, I didn't like super hulk out, right? So, like, I get what you're saying now. So there's not just one way to be transgender. There's not just one way to transition. And so, people approach it in different ways. And I think this is what makes it so complicated in sports, right? Is that sports is two categories. It is, there's not a lot of room for expansion. There's not a lot of room for gray area, right? And I exist in that area between two categories in sport in a lot of ways. And so I made a social transition, and asking people to change pronouns, and I changed the restroom that I use, locker rooms that I use. So and maybe it'd be just easier to go through this. There are three main ways that people transition, and the first is social. So changing name, pronouns, hairstyle, gender expression through clothing, mannerisms, and then restrooms or locker rooms, facilities that they use. A medical transition would be taking medical interventions. So hormone therapy like testosterone that I take, or testosterone suppression and estrogen treatment, or making medical interventions such as gender affirming surgeries. And then the third way is legal transition. And that'd be legally changing your gender on documents like your birth certificate, driver's license, social security cards, passports, things like that, which are all necessary for people to get jobs, to get housing, to be able to fly, like those sort of things. So, and it's not easy to do all of those things in all places. And it can, I'm sure it's different in the UK than it is here in the United States.
Yeah.
So I understood my identity, and I didn't tell anyone aside from my partner for about a year and a half, because I was terrified to transition, because I didn't see people like me in the world, particularly in sports. And I didn't know trans men in real life. And, even living in New York City, one of the largest places in the world, I didn't know trans people in real life. I didn't have close friends. I didn't have people I could ask questions to. So I felt like I wasn't sure if I could go through with, taking such a bold step, knowing that if I didn't know anybody, people around me certainly didn't know anybody either. I didn't see people in sports either. And I still wanted to be an athlete. And that was such an important part of my experience. So, the turning point was my 29th birthday. And I was at a restaurant with my wife, partner at the time. And the waiter came over and must have said, "Hey ladies, can I take your order?" And I ordered my food. And when they walked away, I just burst into tears, and it was inconsolable. Went outside, sitting on the sidewalk, just sobbing. And it was because I couldn't imagine living another life and another year of my life like that. It just felt like that was the moment, that waiter saying that to me, seeing me like that, that I just couldn't imagine living another year, making it to another birthday as that version of who I was. And so that really was what sparked it and set a plan in motion for me taking the steps that I needed to feel more aligned in how I was showing up with other people. And that was a social transition. So, asking people to change the pronouns, and also a medical transition. So I do take testosterone. on sporting purposes, I have to get a therapeutic use exemption form and make sure that I'm within a certain range limit so that I can continue to participate in Team USA and international sports. Yeah, and so that was, that was really it.
That range that you're talking about is to not take too much because that's what you can get done for doping. I'm assuming is that essentially that limit, is that's the upper limit?
Yeah, I mean, so it's interesting, right? The limit for testosterone for men is enormous. It's like something like 600 points of testosterone, a range of in the 300s to the 900s. And I think the flag is if I go over that, it flags because it's outside of the limit. But it's interesting because cisgender men are never tested on their testosterone levels. Yeah. Testing is something specifically done to female athletes and to transgender people. And so, it's really an interesting comparison. There are a lot of negative things that can happen medically and internally if I take too much testosterone and, things. I love my hair. I want to keep my hair, too much testosterone, too much testosterone can convert to estrogen. So like there is a healthy range for me to be in to achieve, what I'm intending to do by taking testosterone. Anytime that someone externally takes testosterone it could be flagged for doping. So that's the reason for the therapeutic use exemption.
And you started in 2010, right? And
correct.
How that process takes how long? Or is it a gradual process? Do you start to feel impact fairly early? How long does that take?
Yeah, it's a gradual process, and I think I had lived 29 years in my body as it was before, and so to feel the changes happening, I was very aware because I was looking for certain things. Like I wanted this mustache and a beard when I in 2010. It took me until 2020 to get it, so 10 years to be able to curl the tips of this mustache. But I think there were certain things that I was looking for and certain changes that I knew were possible based on things that I had read or videos I had seen on YouTube. But it was definitely a very gradual change, and I think that I still feel like I'm changing and growing and evolving, and nothing enormous. But in the first year of taking testosterone, I gained 10% of my body weight. So I went from being 120 pounds to being 132 pounds.
Wow.
So and you have to consider that this was also in a really heavy peak of training too. So there were it was muscle mass that I was mostly putting on. But to gain that much muscle, I think for anybody, the bodybuilders or people training, it feels very uncomfortable to be in your body, and you have to get used to being in your own skin again. And I think that was a change for me as well.
And then not only that, you transitioned, and then you got to 2016, and you're now succeeding in what you're doing. So you made the Team USA. You made Team USA, and once you started your transition period, did you feel like, okay, now, or once you felt, I don't know whether there's a moment you get to where you feel like I'm in a comfortable spot and you can really focus on your training, and you were then like, right, this is not something you can park, but something that is now gaining much more comfortability with you. But was there a moment where you're like, I can now really focus on training? And because your story is incredible, to just be able to, anyone to be able to get to that level, but to go through what you've gone through and then still get there is an incredible achievement, and without no shadow of a doubt takes a certain amount of dedication. So yeah, was there a finite moment where you're like, this is where I'm going?
Yeah, I think there was probably a lot of uncertainty in the beginning part of my transition of saying, I've never seen someone like me succeed in competing with men, and definitely not at a high level. And, is it even possible to do that? But I think that sort of questioning, that sort of, double dare idea of like people saying that it couldn't be done gave me more motivation to say, let's see, I think that I can do it. And so that really inspired me to try harder. I felt like I had to work twice as hard as anybody else out there just because people doubted me so much. And then I think also part of it was the self-compensation of feeling like I had to I had to really excel in order to be valid or to be worthy of being seen as a man, at least in those first years of transition. So there was really a lot of pressure that I put on myself. And then once I found that there was this opportunity to be a role model for other people, to be the person who broke the door open, to allow other people like me to see themselves in sport, I used that as motivation then to work extra hard as well. I think there was one race actually, that I remember being at the start line, and I knew at the start of it, I was like, I'm going to win this race. I'm going to win this race. And I had seen it, doing the athlete visualization. I pictured myself winning that race, for a month leading up to it. And when we showed up on that day, I had this moment of being, of recognizing as I'm starting and I'm lining up at the front of the pack with all of the other men who were contenders, just of saying like, wow, I do belong here. I'm a fast guy and I belong up here with the fast guys. And I had to talk myself into towing the line in that position, because I think I had just always kind of seen myself as being, not middle of the pack, but not worthy of being up there at the front. And so, that was that race, and I did win. that race was, was a moment where I was like, no, I have earned my spot here. I've worked my ass off. This is where I belong. And it was really validating for me to see that from start to finish, right? To be dreaming of being in that position, to then taking the line, winning the race, and saying, no, like I do belong here. I am that guy.
Did you get much friction in the field from the other athletes, with your situation?
No, I think athletes are pretty special, right? If anybody who's working hard and trying to what it takes as an athlete, even athletes across different sports. Like I just love talking to athletes, because if you're a high performing athlete, what it takes to get there. And I don't know all of the specifics of training for cricket and how you would potentially tear your hamstring off your body, but but I do know that I know that work ethic and the dedication that it takes, right, as an athlete. So that I think has bridged the gap between any lack of understanding about what it means to be trans, and only because I'm a trans man, only because I inherited male privilege, only because I'm seen as a straight white guy, for lack of better words. I'm queer. People don't read that, but they don't necessarily know that I'm trans unless they have read about me, and they don't necessarily know that I'm queer unless I've told them. And so all of those things, when we're in competition, everybody's just worried about themselves. So I have not had friction from my competitors in that sort of way. And also there's this understanding or this belief that I would never be competitive against men because I was assigned female at birth. So, no one assigned female at birth could possibly win against men, because men are bigger, faster, stronger, better athletes than people assigned female at birth. And, regardless of proving that wrong time and time again, 6 times on Team USA with the men, still people just kind of shrug their shoulders and say, good job. And it's a non-issue. Sometimes it's an issue for spectators if they know me, or like in the early part of my transition, people would sometimes yell at me, that sort of basketball moment of, are you a guy or a girl? Like that sort of thing. But my competitors, even the second place guy in that race that I won, found me on Facebook and was like, oh, wow, I didn't know you're trans. Great job out there. You crushed the race, and keep up with the activism work. You're doing great. Like I've had that sort of experience on the whole. And I think part of it is because multi-sport, triathlon, duathlon is really, welcoming, or at least has been for me. And, running and cycling, I think those are also things that people who are runners become friends with people that they would never talk to outside of running, because of that shared experience. And that's really been a blessing for me.
It's when you start to go in the other end of that, and people find there's the more controversial talk around trans women. And I mean, with the Olympics having just gone, you have people like Laurel Hubbard who competed, and having actually listened to your conversation with Rich Roll in the podcast you did with him, you said something in there which was really eye-opening, and then I kind of went into it a little bit more and watched more athletes that were competing in that space. And you said trans athletes are not dominating. Like, it's people are getting this wrong. It's people are reading the spectrum, and they're going to this far-fetched imaginary space, creating a headline and making it fact. And that was so true. Like, and Laurel Hubbard was a great example, that people were like, well, she's just going to turn up at the event and she's going to win everything. And didn't qualify. I don't think it got through qualifying. I'm not sure, but it didn't get on the podium. That's for sure.
Yeah, she was the first athlete out. She was the very first athlete out. So yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right. The key number to remember here is 0. There have been 0 trans athletes dominating in sports, and there have been 0 problems in the United States with trans athletes in high school. There have been 0 cases of a trans athlete taking a scholarship from a cisgender athlete. I know of 0 athletes, transgender athletes, who have actually gotten athletic scholarships to go to college in the United States. And I know a lot of trans athletes, and I mentor a lot of young people. So, I think that it really has been massively blown out of proportion intentionally, because in the United States and globally, it has become a political issue where, it's really, people are using tweets and headlines as facts, like you said, and there's so much nuance. I mean, just even when I was explaining to you the different ways to transition, right? You can imagine like that not all trans athletes fall within, I'm a case study of one. And so while I share my experience and I try to be visible for other people to see me, it doesn't mean that every trans athlete who's a trans man is going to be like me and is going to follow the same steps and the same journey that I've done. And so that's where it becomes really complicated when we start to talk about there's more nuance to it than just saying trans athletes can play here and this is the rule. And that's why we have a patchwork of policies. And that's also why we've seen global attacks and specifically in the UK, where there are several hate groups that have been leading the global charge against transgender athletes.
It comes from miseducation and the lack of understanding of the realm in which they're discussing, and this whole idea that like someone who has been a man for 30 years, and it tends to be in power sports, so powerlifting and MMA. Like MMA, there was the fight, I forget her name, she fought recently and won, and then there was controversy. It was actually just before September 11th. Yep. But I watched that fight and she won, but it's not like she dominated that fight. She was taking blows, like she was getting hit and hard, and the woman that she was fighting was 6 foot and had, I think, like 6 inches on reach. So if you literally put these two fighters up against each other on stats, you're like, that one should win. And it was a chokehold that won it, and it was poor defensive work from the fighter who lost, and at the same time she agreed to get in the cage. There's all of these steps that people have gone into, but the headline was trans woman beats woman in MMA fight, and that just clickbait, and people get onto it or swipe past it and go, God, what a ridiculous thing that is. And that's where, if you actually, it didn't take me long to figure all this out. It's not like this was stuff that needed deep research. It took me 10 minutes to watch the fight, understand what was going on, find out a little bit about that athlete. What is the process that's gone through here? And okay, this is not as criminal that you're all making it out to be.
Right. And specifically in MMA, which people love to come back to, she is the second MMA fighter that I know of who is a trans woman. And, MMA is it's a violent sport. People do get bones broken. They do get choked out. They do get knocked down. And so to say that, a trans athlete is causing exponentially more harm than any other athlete who's out there throwing punches and kicking people in the face, like, it's just kind of ridiculous. But you're right. Like, people really do take that stereotypical version of, I always say it's like people think an NFL linebacker is going to say that they're suddenly, identify as a woman and then go dominate in college, basketball or something. Like, it just doesn't happen. And it hasn't happened. It's not going to happen, because if people understand how our world is set up, no one assigned male at birth is going to pretend to be a woman to gain athletic, advantage in women's sports. Like that just isn't going to happen. So it's really based on myths and misconceptions and this fear of domination, this fear of fear of trans people, I guess. Like when I try to think about it, what is it actually? Because I don't truly believe that cisgender men are that invested in protecting women's sports. Because here in the United States, the same people who are saying that they're trying to protect girls and women in the very next conversation or the previous conversation before that have been trying to take away cisgender women's rights to bodily autonomy, to making choice about reproduction, like things like that. So I don't believe that it's cisgender men trying to protect women. I don't believe that all of these men, and it is largely men who are introducing this legislation, are invested in protecting women's sports, that they are buying tickets to games or watching women's games on TV. I don't believe they could name their favorite, women athletes. And so, I think there's a lot of problems that are wrapped up in this, and it's not about what they say it's about.
I think the thing that struck me, again, going back to the conversation you had with Rich Roll when I watched that, was the thing that I loved about you was the fact that that conversation was happening with such composure and it was happening with such calmness. And I think that it just leans on people's scared mentality around something that's different from their own beliefs. And you could have changed the complete context of that conversation that you're having into religion, into race, and just the tone at which that conversation is happening allows it to happen. I think people feel that whether it's something like veganism, whether it's a religion, whether it's gender, race, anything, they straight away go to that one person that they've had an interaction with that was extremely militant on the subject, and then they brash everyone with that thinking, and they believe everyone is like that. So every trans man is going to be like that trans man that I met, who, no, that's just some individual that was not great at getting the argument across, not good at contextualizing it, was far too emotive in how they delivered it. And having that composure of your emotions in that conversation, I felt was one thing that you brought across, and you've brought across in this conversation so well, and it's so important to have these conversations openly, because as soon as people start to get heated, it just shuts down everything. No one wants to listen regardless of what it is.
Yeah. And there's not, I try to put myself in a position where I can understand what other people's fears are and what they're worried about, because I had such a great experience in women's sports. And as a young person, like I love playing women's sports. I didn't quite feel like I belonged there when people were saying ladies or girls, but it was an incredible experience. And I think we do need to make sure that women have a space to play sports. And I think we can do that. We can have safe and fair sports and also include everyone. And so, I appreciate that feedback. I think what we see is that every trans person is often put in a position to have to speak on behalf of the entire community, because, not every trans athlete wants to be an activist. Not every trans person wants to have to defend their identity or explain it to people who are not transgender. And I've taken on that role. I've willingly taken on that role. I think my legacy, my purpose here as a person is to create pathway for other people to more fully and authentically be able to be themselves and to participate in the sports that they love, or to do what they love, to follow their passions. And I want to share my experience and use my platform as an athlete to get that message across. But not every trans person wants to be that person. And so if you put a microphone in front of somebody who's just trying to play their sport, just trying to live their life, we may get those answers that are more emotive. Not everybody has the talking points that I have, or has thought about it as much as I have. And so, I think that it becomes very complicated when people are demanding education or understanding of experiences from people who don't really want to share. And that's not everybody's, it's not every trans person's responsibility to educate cis people on the experiences of being transgender.
Yeah, well, you've paved the way for so many, and you've managed to to get into this place where you've now become a role model for so many, and you are that yardstick that everyone can look at and look up to, and hopefully be that role model in that area. They're going to have I believe many athletes have different role models, and I respect female athletes in what they've done, and will take bits from them. But your story, your journey, like, people are going to now have something, a pathway in which they believe they can understand, and not only that, resource that they can go to. What do you think is or what's your main goal in the next sort of year with whether it's policy changes? What are you targeting? Where do you believe the most ground can be made up? I guess in the LGBTQ plus community.
For me, it's really been the last year and a half, 2 years have been a real strong focus on transgender people in sports, which has really been, shocking as somebody who's been out since 2010, who has been competing at a high level for 6 years, for the focus to now be on people like me in sports, when there aren't very many people like me in sports, has really been interesting. And so I feel really called to continue to protect and support the transgender athletes and non-binary people who just want to play the sports that they love. And we have to remember that elite athletes are such a small part of the athletic population, right? While we have people like Laurel Hubbard who are being talked about consistently at the Olympic level, we have young people who are 15 years old who just want to play the sports that they love with their friends after school. And those people deserve an opportunity to have those same experiences as their peers. We've seen an uptick in legislation against the trans community. In the United States, there were over 300 anti-LGBTQ bills that were introduced this year in 2021. And half of them targeted the trans community, and over 75 of them targeted transgender kids in sports. And we're seeing this in the United States, but we're also seeing it globally. The UK is a space where it's not necessarily safe for trans people in sports either. And I want to find ways to support all trans people in pursuing their passions in athletics. And I think that's really important. So policy-wise, it's about fighting this legislation in the United States specifically. But I think the way that I'm shifting to do this now is by doing it through trans joy. And just, I think there's so much narrative around this sort of trauma of being transgender. And trust me, there is a lot of trauma around being transgender in a world that does not support trans people, does not understand trans people. And I acknowledge that my experience as a white trans man has been very different than the experiences of my peers who are transgender women or trans people of color. And, to be at that intersection of being a trans woman of color, those athletes have experienced such discrimination just wanting to participate in sports, not even winning, trying to play the games that they love. So, I think that need to be conscious of that legislation and fighting it to make sure there are opportunities for all people. And the big shift right now is including non-binary athletes in the conversation as well, which I think is, for a lot of people will make their heads pop off their shoulders, because they already can't understand someone like me making a very binary transition. Like, I transitioned to male. I feel like I fit pretty well in the men's category. I'm largely, read, acknowledged, understood to be a man in the world, even without the mustache. And, I think that that's a very different experience than non-binary people. And yet non-binary, young people are sharing their identities more and more often. And they also want to play sports. And we need policies and setups that allow them to have these experiences and opportunities without problems. And they shouldn't have to defend themselves.
That's a misconception on people's part, where they think that they forget that they're just trying to compete. They just want to play. And it's again, the idea that people are throwing their expectation of what that athlete, that trans athlete wants, which is, they want to compete, they want to win, they want to take over our sport, they want to like that. They're already running away with a storyline that's probably not even anywhere near true, because they haven't opened up the conversation or the dialogue to find out what is What is it that you guys are after, and what is it that you want to do? What do you want to compete? Do you want to win? Do you want to go? Where do you want to go? And I think there was something actually that you'd mentioned. I heard this stat was, and it may be new, it may be different, was that 41% of trans youth have attempted suicide.
Yes, that's
is that still true?
Yep. Yeah, and I mean, perhaps even more. We saw outrageous increases in calls to LGBTQ plus and trans-specific hotlines after each of these legislative bills have been introduced in the United States. So Texas alone has tried 6 times now to pass a bill just this year that would prevent trans kids from playing sports. You know, they bring in these trans kids to share their experiences, the parents, the doctors, 10 to 1 outnumbering the people who want to ban this. Ban trans athletes, and every single time that bills are introduced, we see spikes in the number of calls to hotlines. And on the flip side, for a person to have an affirming space like a sports team, just one affirming person, a coach, a teammate who validates a young trans person's identity, we see a 25% reduced risk of self-harm.
Wow.
So it's very much related.
That's an incredible stat and reduction as well. And you also, I'd heard you talk about how, and forgive me, because again, in the UK, like you've mentioned, it's not very accepted. I actually come from Brighton, so down south, and we are one of the most open cities. I think with the gay capital of Europe at one. Whether we're still holding that title, I'm not sure. It flips between us and Birmingham, I think. But if you walk down into Brighton, there is a huge LGBTQ community. It's massive. It actually takes up almost one half of the city, and it's just the pride when it happens here is fantastic, and everyone comes in, enjoys it. People travel from all around the country, and the acceptance that people get from that, I can imagine, is incredible. And this mental health crisis that is happening with trans youth, you had mentioned it being a symptom, not a cause. And that is so true. Like I've heard people in the UK, not everyone is like Brighton down here. And you go to other parts of the country, everyone has very different opinions. People will say like, oh, someone who is trans is mentally unwell. And I've heard that phrase be used, and it's so wrong, because the mental illness and the mental health issues that they're facing are a symptom of the prejudices that are being put upon them.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I couldn't say it better myself. It's very true, but and then that perpetuates it, right? So like, then people think that someone like me is mentally ill, which then creates more stress, which then influences the way that they interact with me. And then again, if you put a microphone in front of somebody and tell them to defend themselves, people will find reasons to support, find situations that will support their idea, right? So you're going to question some person who has no intention of being an advocate or an activist for their community and just trying to live their life, and then tell them that they have to defend trans people in sport. What they're going to end up with is a soundbite that will largely support the idea that this person is unable to regulate their emotions, or is angry, or yes, we're angry. Trans people have all the reason to be angry, because look at the way the world is set up, and how for no reason, with no evidence, are trying to be banned from sports, as just one example, or preventing people from having IDs that affirm their gender, that align with their gender, preventing them from having medical interventions, or being able to go to the hospital. If I break my arm, there's this thing called the trans broken arm syndrome. It's like, if I break my arm, you don't have to question me about my transition, right? Like, please just fix my arm. And every medical situation that I've had has been, even in LGBTQ plus places that serve our community, there's been just such a lack of understanding about trans identity and about our needs in healthcare that is an extremely stressful, situation. And I, take this back to my recent hip surgery. So, where the hip is located, and my like fear about how a doctor is going to interact with me and my
Mm,
body when I'm on a surgery table, and what, for the people, are they trained? Uh,
yeah.
are they affirming? Are they understanding? What will be my situation in both that care and then in my physical therapy afterwards. So there's a lot of stress that comes along with that, and people people need to understand that stress is a result of the environment and the
Mhm.
situations that are created, not of some imbalance within all trans people.
Yeah, like I'd mentioned to you before, this podcast is about trying to link between well-being and performance of athletes. And is there something that you felt with these? I mean, not only the sport you play puts you through much physical stress, and I imagine mental stress as well, but as well the societal impact that you must have faced and you have faced. How do you manage your stress? What are the things that you like doing in order to manage your own stress levels?
I am someone who thrives off of stress. I was, in journalism when I was in college, and editor of a newspaper, and so deadlines and like having that high stress environment was a good place for me, until it wasn't, right?
Yeah.
For as with anything, but um, yeah, I thrive off that stress and that pressure, and I created it a little bit myself in terms of I think a lot of athletes uh, find the naysayers or the haters as motivation. And
Mm,
there was certainly a time period where I wanted to prove people wrong, and then that shifted to wanting to prove myself right and to keep my own promises to myself, and
mm,
there being real satisfaction in that through that process. And so how I deal with my stress, I think that it's all an opportunity. Every day in training and competing and being an athlete is an opportunity to share more of my experience with the world, to be a role model for other people, and to be someone that other people can not only be inspired by, but find aspirational as well. Like can create their own version of my experience that fits themselves. I am a big fan of visualization, of meditation, of mindfulness, of taking quiet time and centering myself. And I think that as much of my more recent work has been, it's been mental as much as it's been physical.
mm.
And I think carving out that time is probably the hardest part. It's easy to check off the boxes of saying, okay, I have a 2 hour training session here, or I have to hit the gym and do this. But to prioritize mental training as much
Yeah.
as the physical training has been harder. But I think that that's been how I've sort of achieved a balance you know in overall wellness, because I think I'm also a coach, and it's really easy for me to prescribe this to my athletes, knowing what I
Yeah.
know, and harder to follow myself. But the visualization, the looking back at my training logs, taking that time to do the mental work, the affirmations and things like that, has been really, really helpful, and also the hardest to do, even harder than
Yeah.
foam rolling.
Yeah. Yeah. And look, I mean, each athlete in themselves and each person in themselves will have their own values that they believe make them not only who they are, but as an athlete as well. What are some of the values that you believe have been crucial to you gaining the success that you've had on the bike, on the road, even walking as well? So the race walking. What do you believe some of those values are?
Yeah, I struggle. Is it values? Is it I don't know that I necessarily call them values, but like my foundational elements, right, are, I think they all came from playing youth sports, and that's
Yeah.
first, really important to note. And again, one of the reasons why every young person should have the opportunity to play sports. So all of the great things that I love about myself and that have helped me be successful in the workplace, in sports, have come from playing sports as a kid.
Mm,
And it's the resilience and dedication, keeping my promises, so to myself and to other people. So there's a loyalty component of being on a team that's really important to me, um, and goal setting, time management, communication skills, leadership skills, working with others who are not like you. All of those things
yeah.
come from playing sports, and I think all of them are essential to to me being successful in anything that I do now. All of those came from sports, and I think also my Midwest upbringing. So there's something
Right.
about it, the Midwest in the United States is hardworking, humble, and put your head down, grind, do the work, and let your actions speak for you.
Yeah.
And I think that's been really important.
I think not only for the messages that you are sending out to the world and the experiences that you've had, but in general, sport for me is one of the best tools for it. It can be tough for inclusivity, and I'm sure you've experienced that, but it can be one of the best tools for it as well, because I think about my experiences, the people that I have met and I have played with, I've played against, race, religion, upbringing, like economic, social background, like it's completely varied. And I would never have had those experiences if it wasn't for sport and travel and being able to move from place to place. I found it really interesting. I've spent a lot of time in Australia, and there are some pockets of Australia, especially where I was, that people, I honestly believe if we were having this conversation, I can put myself, if we were sitting in a place having this conversation, there would be things being thrown at us. Like it's 25 years behind in some areas. And I thought to myself, like, why is that? And it's down to the fact that travel and being open to different people and people's perspectives and outlooks and beliefs, that you can create that openness in yourself. And I pride myself on that, for me, that I have been able to interact with so many different people and just get on with them on such a human basis, because that's all you are. Like, you are just a human being that is trying to do the best you can in whatever upbringing and situation you've had. And sport brought that. Sport brought that 100%.
Yeah, more than anything, I think being a good person is my baseline metric for success. And so, I'm an athlete who I don't want to win at the expense of harming someone else, right? I'm not going to cheat to win, right? So that is really important to me, to be a good person and to be a good role model. And I think you're absolutely right. I've always said that sport is a vehicle for social change. And I truly believe that, well, I said, sport was such a safe space for me as a young person, and even now as an adult. And it's not a safe space for all people like me. And so it holds both of these, both of these are true, that it is a very unsafe space for some people. And it also can be the most affirming and welcoming experience because of the dynamics of a team and, people working hard together towards a common goal. Meeting people who are not like you, different races, religions, gender identities, backgrounds, experiences, all of that. It's so important, because I think if we can create change, if I specifically can create change in sports, on our sports teams, of people meeting me, of getting to know me, of understanding trans identity a little more, that ripples out into the rest of the world, because we are not just athletes in isolation. I'm an athlete, but I have friends who are not in sports, and I have a partner, and I have a family, and I have communities and events that I go to. And, if you and I can have this conversation, and then you talk about it with your friends, and then they talk about it with their children, and that's how change happens, and it starts within sport. And so it just gives me such great hope, despite the bad policies that are being put forward, despite the World Rugby's ban on all transgender women in sports, despite these things that are happening in athletics for trans and non-binary people in sports right now. It gives me such great hope to know that change is possible in sports, and that could influence the change around the globe.
Do you think it's moving in the right direction? Fairness and inclusion. Do you think it's a big topic, but do you feel it's moving in the right direction? Obviously, you've spoken about there's people pushing the other way.
Yeah.
But do you feel, as a general?
Well, I think my recovery process in hip surgery is a great example for this. It's a great parallel, right? Progress is not always linear. And so it's not any athlete knows that the process of getting better means that there are some days that really suck and there are some days that really hurt. And that doesn't mean that we're not moving in the right direction, but it's more peaks and valleys than it is just a straight line going up. And so I do believe that we're moving in the right direction because we're having these conversations. And while the conversations are really, clashing, and there are two extreme sides, I do believe that there is this whole group of people who are open-minded, who are just unsure or unaware of the facts, and lack an education or an understanding, or even the experience of talking to somebody who's trans. And that, those are the people who give me hope, because there are people who are firmly camped on either side of inclusion or exclusion, that are unwilling to have conversations, that are unwilling to be open to having their perspective changed. And those people, I don't engage with those folks, right? Yeah. So if someone already has their mind firmly made up, there's no personal value for me to spend my energy or time trying to move them from a position that they've so firmly rooted themselves in. But for all those people who are open to learning more, who are open to hearing about my experience or considering new information, I think I have great hope that we're moving in the right direction. I think we're going to see more inclusive policies in professional sports. And I know that because I'm working on them. I know that right now we're going to see more policies that include non-binary athletes, and we're going to have more conversations like we've had in the lead up to the Olympics and Paralympic Games. And those conversations will continue. And I think that we can no longer pretend that trans people don't exist and don't want to play sports. And the next step is just getting people to understand what that actually means. Who trans people are, that we're not pretending to be someone else, that we're not trying to gain a competitive advantage, that we are athletes like any other athlete. And we play sports for the same reasons as anybody else does, because, we want to move our bodies. We love to be competitive. We want to be connected to our teammates and our communities, and because we love the game.
Yeah, this beautifully said. Everything you've just put there. Look, I've realized how long we've gone, and I don't want to take up any more of your time than I've already cheekily took away. But people can find you on Twitter and Instagram at the Chris Mosier and transathlete.com. That's the main resource. Are there any other resources that you recommend people go to learn, to discover more?
Yeah, it's mostly Twitter is rants and commentary. Instagram is more of that, and ways that people can get involved. Transathlete.com is the main one, but coming soon, nonbinaryathlete.com for folks in non-binary sport policy, coming soon. So keep your eyes open for that.
Look, I've loved spending this time with you and getting to meet you. And like you mentioned, these conversations hopefully have some sort of ripple effect. And I think whoever's listening, I hope they can take something out of this, have learned something, and can create that little ripple effect in their own community, to have that conversation, whether it's at the dinner table with someone who may have a certain stance or ideology around these subjects. And that's what I hope the most from a conversation like this. And I really appreciate your openness and your vulnerability and your honesty and everything. And so thank you so much for doing this.
Thank you for having me. I've loved our conversation, and I love what you're doing with the podcast and with your app. I'm a big fan. So thank you so much.
Oh, thank you so much, Chris. Appreciate it.